Okay, it's 1:00, so welcome everybody to Nordic Sustainable Constructions webinar, Nordic View on Data Needs and Scenario Settings for Building LCA. We have quite a few slides and a long report to share with you, and this webinar is also recorded. So please note that the recording has already started. I will be giving you some thoughts on how the practicalities go in a minute. But first, if you take the next slide, I'll go through the agenda. So there's first an introduction by Maria Tiainen from Finnish Ministry of Environment on what the kind of big picture of this, what is the Nordic sustainable construction and this harmonization part of it. And then we go into this specific project and webinar report. I'll tell about it a little bit, and then we delve into the details of it with Martin Erlandsson's report. Martin's from IVL, the Swedish Environmental Research Institute, and goes through the recommendations, the kind of all the details of the calculation of the GBP data. Then we talk about the databases, the generic national databases a little bit, what we have learned in the past few years when we have been running those. And then after that, we take one of the data issues that we have had in this research and go into details of the vegetation tree data, specifically with Heli Miettinen from National Resource Institute in Finland. And then we have a Q&A session, an open discussion. So I'm asking for you to hold your questions, write them in the Slido, if you take the next slide as well. So there is a Slido for this webinar, and if you post your questions there, then we can handle them at the end of the presentations. Just to make sure that we have time for all the presentations, and also we'll try to have the questions session in the end, as much time as possible. Please keep also your microphones muted, and then just write the comments in the Slido. We are not really following the Teams chat, as the Slido is the kind of method for it. It's quite easy to use. If you have any specific questions, please you can in the beginning use the Teams chat for that. That's about the practicalities. I think we'll go into the subject matter, and I'll hand it over to Maria.
So thank you. Hello to everyone, and welcome to this webinar on my behalf also. My name is Maria Tiainen, and I work as a senior specialist at the Ministry of the Environment in Finland. And I am the project owner and leading this project from our part. This is actually our second webinar of this project, but a fourth or actually fifth webinar of the whole project or work package. The recordings and the materials can be found on the website of the Nordic Sustainable Construction, so you can go and see the other recordings. Actually, yesterday we had the latest webinar of this work package. I said this by Janne, this webinar will be recorded, and you can find the recording afterwards. And before starting the actual content of this webinar, I will shortly say a couple of words of the whole project and who are behind the project. Well, not behind, I don't mean Janne's and Martin's organization, but who are financing this project. Yes, next slide, please. So the Nordic Sustainable Construction is a program under the Nordic Council of Ministers, which contributes the Nordic Vision 2030 of becoming a sustainable and integrated region by 2030 in respect to sustainable construction and housing. The purpose of the program is to accelerate the knowledge and capacity for a green transition in the Nordic construction sector, also strengthen Nordic collaboration and ensure an aligned Nordic path. Next, please. The whole program is organized in the following 5 work packages, working with a specific area of sustainable construction. So we have Nordic harmonization of life cycle assessment, circular business models and procurement, sustainable construction materials and architecture, emission-free construction site, and program secretariat and competence for reuse in construction. This project belongs to the first work package, Nordic harmonization of life cycle assessment. This work package is the largest work packages, and as a whole, the work package will be finalized during this year. And this webinar is the end webinar of this task 2. In Nordic harmonization of life cycle assessment, in this work package, we work towards harmonization normative methods for building LCAs in the Nordic countries. Also, similar approaches will benefit construction industry and policymakers on national and municipal levels so that we can support each other's climate ambitions in region and in a green public procurement, but also in the European policy development. Next, please. So this work package consists of 5 subtasks. So we have task 1, Nordic LCA practices, which was finalized already a year ago. This task 2, is databases and scenarios, and we will hear about this project today. So I do not tell more about that because Janne and Martin will explain about the project and the results of the project and report. Then we have task 3, which is digitalization of LCA, which is about the development of LCA guidance for BIM models, also development of national reference buildings into BIM, and also development of training models. Then we have task 4, which is about limiting values, joint methods for defining country-specific limiting values where needed, and also about the joint process for reporting the climate impact of Nordic built environments. And our last project, task 5, is about acceleration program, which gave its first webinar yesterday. It's about to accelerate the decarbonization of buildings and construction sector, which gives like a actual help and clinic for construction project to decarbonize the new buildings or renovation project as well. Next slide, please. And more information of the whole project and work packages you can find from LinkedIn and Twitter, and also our website, nordicsustainableconstruction.com, and also this recording will be can be found there. Thank you on my behalf. I have a nice webinar. I give floor back to Janne and Martin.
There. Thank you, Maria. And then we'll go into an introduction of the task 2, as mentioned by Maria, this project. And If we take the next slide and start with the kind of overall of the project. So the main objective of the project was to seek the common Nordic understanding on the kind of establishment and maintenance of data for environmental assessment of buildings. The core of the project was the data and the databases that we already have, and then the kind of outcome, as mentioned, is the report, and this is a report for LCA experts and authorities, and meant for as a kind of common base for discussion. There's lots of going on at the moment, and this is kind of the start of the discussion. Try to cover all the basics. If you take the next slide, there's the project scope. So first of all, the common Nordic approach to LCA data. There we have kind of the parts of the review of the European development, the very busy development at the moment, and then go into the kind of typical data and the process of creating that, and how to define typical data and how does it relate to the specific data. Then the Nordic approach to lifecycle scenarios. These will be all discussed by Martin in the next presentation. We also have looked at the interoperability of data, since that's a growing area. We have been doing these things in quite separately at the moment, but it all needs to be glued together in the future. The project also had a new data and principles section, kind of a research on some of the areas where we have kind of a lack of good data and good research, and those are the data for vegetation, which will be presented today by Heli Miettinen, and then there was also a discussion on sustainable forestry, and also a data for old buildings, meaning the existing buildings that we might need some data about when doing some renovations. These two last bits are not further discussed today, and you can read about that in the report. We go forward to the next slide and look at the people involved in the project. There has been quite a lot of people writing the report and aiding in finding the data and sparring about the role of this in other countries, so we get a full picture of all Nordic countries and Estonia as well. Will not read all the names there, but you can do that in the new report, which is presented here. There is the link to report. It can already be found on the Nordic Sustainable Construction website. It's the latest report, so it's easy to find at the moment. If you go forward, then there's the kind of contents of the report. This is how it looks in the web. And as you see, we have quite a few annexes, and the report is on the PDF format, more than 200 pages. So we will not be going through the details of it, but kind of give you an introduction to what's in the project and highlighting some of the results today. So please visit the site, look at the report there, or download the PDF. Also good to stop and think that we have done, again, over 200 pages of research here. Why are we really doing this, and so on. But it's quite clear that in the long process of construction, starts in the planning and the long lifespan of the buildings, and then end of the life. There are lots of different stakeholders involved in that process, and everybody needs to be involved and do something to get the nice results we are seeking for. There's also lots of action in the market everywhere and in the regulation. There are lots of data sources where we can find this kind of data. There are lots of separate tools, and there are lots of different calculations and calculation methods. So we really need to make sure that we have a firm foundation. We understand, at least here in the Nordics, what all of this is, and also go into the little details of the methods, since those are often the ones that will cause lots of work afterwards if they are not defined well in the beginning. There's also an EU regulation that will be telling a lot in the future, but it's still in the kind of early phases, being drawn specifically, and it's important for us to gather the Nordic view on that as well. The next slide, you can see the kind of a Nordic situation where we are faster than Europe. On the other, the rest of the Europe on getting there. So the limit values, the climate declarations, calculating GWP, life cycle GWP is not something that's foreign to us Nordic countries, but it's not in most European countries. It's not as far ahead. So we're also trying to give some input to the EU regulation and make sure that we have as good a regulation and feasible one in the future. Then if you take the next slide, that's my introduction to the project. And then we move on to the Martin, but before that, we have, I'll remind you that we are using the Slido. You can take the next slide. And so you please write your questions in the Slido so we can then take them up in the end of the presentations. But now, Martin.
Thank you, Janne. My name is Martin Erlandsson, and I work at IVL, and my specialties is LCA, but I also work with digitalization as a consequence of LCA, because when you calculate the LCA result, you need a lot of data, and that have been forced to be interested in digitalization to support the LCA, so to say. We have a quite challenging approach to give recommendation on GWP data and life cycle scenario settings. But the goal is not to invent the wheel, but start from what is already established, like standards and classification systems, and like that. We can take the next slide. My presentation today is on the level more like summary for policymakers. So if you are interested in in-depth details, you have to read the report. So this is more like, an overview and more the conceptual approach that we have been working with. And this is the item that I will discuss, and those items are part of task 2. And then we have GWP data and databases. That is also part of task 2, but that is presented separately by Janne after my presentation. We can take the next slide. So this is the Nordic project, but we decided in Sweden that we will have a project in parallel to support the Nordic project and learn from 2 projects in parallel. And that means that the Nordic product, we have started with a draft of methodology settings, and then we have presented those results for from national expert and the authorities. We received comments, made changes, and then we drafted a report, and that was reviewed by the authorities. And if we compare with the Swedish project, we can see that there we have a more open public consultation in the end. But it's about the same conceptual approach, but there is 2 differences. In the Swedish project, in parallel to the methodology settings, you already made pilot calculations to investigate what is the effect when they decide something. And in the Nordic project, we also had a topic that is interoperability, and within this topic we discussed classification, and how to report digital information of building elements and products and things like that. It's like the digital passport format. I will not mention so much about this digital product passport format. It turned out to be very complicated. We thought that we could make more progress within this project, but so we have moved this digital product passport and the common format to another product. But we have links in the report where you can find the latest progress. So next slide, please. I think this European legislation that we have now is very promising, and I think it's support the green part, the environmental part, but I also think it support green business. And to do that, we have to have harmonized method. So we have specification on products and buildings that are common in Europe, and we can start with the Nordic countries. And if we take an overview, I think the most important aspects to today topics are the construction product and the construction product regulation. And within the construction product regulation, we now define how the future environmental product declaration should look like. And the environmental product declaration includes data on LCA that could be used for any construction works. So here we have the possibility, if we need something on the building level, we can ask that kind of information to be added in the forthcoming, in the new EPDs, according to the CPR acquis process. Then we have the buildings and the climate declaration for buildings, and we have the taxonomy, where we have already started, and it's decided that we have a global warming potential from A to C. We have a carbon dioxide indicator that covers for 50 years, and you have the value per year. That means per average year then. And they outline as methodology, they outlined 15978, and this standard is under revision. So this means that the latest methodology, the latest specification is for the most people not known if you're not involved in the standardization process. But the goal is that 5978 should be published and available for everyone before the end of this year. And then we also have a reference in the taxonomy to levels, the European classification system. And actually, they don't refer to the whole system. It's in basic two requirements. The inventory scope, how much of the building should be included. That's decided by levels. And then we also, and then they also have requirements on tools, if you use tools to calculate the result. And then now we have the new energy performance and building directive, where there would be a mandatory climate declaration. It has the same approach as for the taxonomy. We see the same references, but we also see some new things. And here is the delegated act that should be published on the latest December 25. And here we will find all this specification like the one that we now work and suggest. So that you can regard our work as an input for this delegated act if you want. And then the requirement will be that for public buildings, you have to make this declaration in 28. And for all other buildings, or for all buildings, you have to do this in 2030. And you also have to have a limit value. And that declaration is for all new buildings. But there is also, if you have a renovation that achieve A+, I don't know what that means, then you should also make a climate declaration. And there is another requirements, and for instance, that the building should at least be 50 square meters, you use the full year and things like that. So this is the basic new framework that we'll all have to fulfill. Next slide, please. So what are they asking for? They are asking for the integrated life cycle indicator. It's one figure for the whole life cycle as an average for these 50 years. and you give it as a GVP indicator, and the GVP indicator is what is called GVP total, includes all the aspects of biogenic climate impact. And there also an additional indicator that you should report the GVP for the energy used to the building. And then they say you may report the temporary storage of biogenic carbon in the building. And that should be a separate, to my understanding, indicator where you can see how much biogenic carbon is stored in product, and then hopefully we can integrate it within the LCA. But this is the starting point to have it as an indicator. And both in the taxonomy and in the EPBD directive, they describe a digital logbook. So everyone is talking about digital logbook that describe the building, but then it's not so clear what exactly it should look like. But in basic, everything that we produce within this kind of legislations, not only this legislation, but other legislations, should be collected in this logbook. So here we will see a tremendous development in the future. And then two important things that we think that should be added to the mandatory list based on the experience from this project is a quality indicator, because we think that you should support the use of EPD and specific data. So if we think that it's important to have as much specific data when you make your calculation, meaning that you should have EPDs from your suppliers of gypsum, insulation, concrete, and things like that, you have to have an indicator of that. And that indicator should be the amount of primary data used for the construction stage. And then we also think that for transparency reason, it should be a development of a transparency reporting. And that could be used for supervision, but it also could be part of any other documentation or communication of the result. We also noticed that in some countries, you perhaps had additional requirements. For instance, a limit value only covering the construction stage, and then you can use the transparency reporting as a basic verification of that result as well. Next slide, please. So the transparency reporting should be found on 5978. And then you have all these information modules. The life cycle is divided in information modules, but you can also split this result per information module where it belongs to the building and where in the building part is it the foundation, is it external walls, or whatever. So we think that you have to add this building parts. And then when you should have supervision, or you should control or check your information, you have to have building elements and with the recipe for a building element, but you can also have the LCA result for the given GVP indicator for this element. And that means that you can have a value, an expected value as a key performance indicator for that kind of building elements. And that can be used for control, quality control. Is my result likely a realistic result compared to the knowledge? What is the normal kind of GVP values for a sandwich bag of external wall made of concrete, for instance? And to do this, we need a classification system. And we are aware of the fact that each country have their own classification system, but we should make mapping to a common system. So we suggest to use the ISO 813-46 to map to that system. So we can have, if we want to have it on a common basis, we can have that. And within the project, we have made these kind of mapping for the system used in the Nordic countries, and it's found in Annex 3. And we also map to the building parts that is listed in the new standard 5978. So all this mapping is easy to done. You can follow our annex. Yeah, next slide, please. Another thing that is more, let's say, under discussion is if you would like to have more like a transparency reporting for comparison. And if you would like to compare the result module by module, the biogenic carbon don't allow you to do that, because in stage A we add the biogenic carbon, and then the rule is in stage C, end of life, the same amount of biogenic carbon should be emitted, and the rule is that this should be zero over the life cycle. But that also means that we can't compare one building from another building for stage A and C. But if we include a new additional indicator that we call GWP greenhouse gases, we take the biogenic carbon away, we will get exactly the same result for the life cycle, but it allows us to compare module A for one building with another building. And it also allows us, if we want to have, as in Sweden, a limit value for the construction stage, we can do that since we have taken the biogenic carbon away. So if you don't have a limit value, or if you have additional limit value national based on not the full life cycle, you have to have another indicator than GWP total. And this is a very important issue, and to understand the consequences with different indicators. But the good thing is the way to calculate this GWP indicator, GWP greenhouse gases, all the information is found in an EPD. And if you have an EPD from GWP International or GWP, EPD Norway, they have this already in the EPDs. Next slide, please. And the other part that I think is very important for a fair comparison or competition is that we have supervision, I mean auditing of the result, especially if we have not only a climate declaration, but when we add the limit value, we have to secure a fair competition between different companies. And to do that, we have to digitalize the EPD and digitalize the supervision. And to do that, we have to build a new digital platform. And this is not outlined in the documentation from the standard, from the EPD directive or taxonomy. So I think this is something that we should stress, that this is something that you have to work on. And also here you have this possibility to use the building element and the LCA reported per building element, but then you have to have the building element in a per cubic meter or per square meter, something like that. So you have this key performance indicator value. And then you can use, for instance, artificial intelligence to investigate the LCA calculations to answer, is this a realistic value? And all the outliers where you have a building element that is outside the normal, you check those building elements. So this is a way to simplify the approach for supervision. So this is just a starting point, and I think we have to work more on this. Can take the next slide, please. Yeah, so in general, if we talk about the scenario settings, we have two basic principles. First of all is a tiered approach. This is European legislation, and to make it as simple as possible is to say that if we have a module that is not so significant to the overall result, and we can simplify it on a European way, for instance, end of life, waste handling, we have a common legislation how to handle landfill, for instance. That means the emission from the landfill is almost the same in Europe. And that means that we can have the opportunity to have a common methodology for landfill and end of life, for instance. And that means if there is a need for an important module where we have differences in the countries, then we suggest that you can have the basic European approach, and you can develop something for your country that is more precise and is more accurate for your country. That means that we will have a cost-effective approach, and we can generalize the method anyhow. The other basic principle is parameterization. what we have learned today when we watch all these GVP databases is that there is a GVP value for sure, but what's behind that figure and how to modify it from a German context to a Swedish context, then the documentation is always not perhaps the best, and that means that we don't have the possibility to look inside this figure and see what's behind this GVP value. But if you instead also report the underlying data used to calculate the GVP, it will create the transparency, but also a flexibility to make adoption of data from someone else to a more specific situation in your country. The next slide, please. I think it's an example of that. So for instance, transportation, it's a good example of parameterization. We can have one value. For instance, if we have a list of materials, and then we can decide on a European level that the transport of ready-made concrete, if you don't have a national value, you should use 0.6 kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram concrete. And then if you would like that more specific for your country, you have to go into the equation behind this. And this is all the aspect that is this GVP value is based on. So this is the list that you need to have information about to calculate this value. But if we report the figures that we have used to calculate this, you can modify it for your country, but you can also modify it for your construction site. So if you have an exact distance from your site, from your construction site to the ready concrete mix production site, then you can actually change that part of the equations. So this is the approach that we suggest, but please note, this is more than is required to 1584. So if this is something that we wish to have in future, we should try to affect the CPR acquis process in this direction. Next slide, please. Another very important setting is the generic scenario setting, how to handle future. The current approach is to use business as usual because that could be verified, but it doesn't tell us so much about the future. So in some classification system, for instance, they have suggested that we fulfill the climate goals. And that means the impact from stage B, the use stage or end of life, will almost be zero because the environmental impact, according to the climate goals, the emission, the impact from is zero in 2050. But then there is the reality, and the reality is we have just decided part of these goals. And this is actually reported to the Commission for each country each 5 years. So these data are handled and recalculated to scenarios that is published by European Commission each 5 years. And here we can find scenarios that we can use up to year 2050. So our approach is that we introduce a decarbonization factor. We calculate the result for B and C with the current data, and then we multiply it with the decarbonization factor. And this means that we have the current, this stage A is 1, and then you have to liner to 2050, and then a line once more where we don't have any further improvement. We can take the next slide, please. So this is called EU Prime, and they divide the result, for instance, in energy sector and all sectors. But if you go into the detail, you see it is almost about the same improvement. So we have suggested to split, to say for everything except B6. And if you calculate module D, it is the D1 in the new standard, you should use the energy decarbonization factor. But in reality, it's almost the same. There is no difference for the material and the material improvement, for the resources used for the construction during its life cycle, and the energy. So here is the data that we suggest to use. And if you think you should have an additional national data set, you can provide that as well, but these are the mandatory scenario to follow. That's at least our recommendation. Next slide, please. Another interesting opportunity to use the EPDs is in the CPR key process. They will likely launch an approach where you, in future, in the EPDs, will introduce 100% scenario for modules C. It should be C3, C4 in the picture, not A3, A4. Sorry for that. So that means that you will describe what is happening if this product goes for 100% for landfill, 100% for material recycling, 100% lost on the site within as part of the demolition and things like that. And then when you use this kind of data on a construction works level for a building, for instance, then you can make your own mix, your country specific mix. And this is very important. And I think it's already decided that this is the future CPR key EPD. They will adopt this and we can use that. So we have to use the EPD in a smart way to support us to give information on the building level. And as it is today, a lot of EPDs include mixed scenarios and we can't use them. So what we need is 100% scenarios. And that also means that these databases that we provide, generic databases, and especially if we have a European generic database, it should also adopt this 100% scenario approach. Then there is also a possibility to improve the use of EPDs for building materials when you do it for your building. In the current specification, you include the energy stored in the product, but you also include the energy stored in packaging material. And that means that you can't use this information for your building. But if you take the energy stored in the packaging away, you can actually use this indicator result, that is the energy stored in the products, that will constitute the full value of the energy stored for all construction products within your building. So if we take the packaging away, this is the new source for calculating C3 and C4. So we will try to influence CPR a key to make these changes, and also the new version of 5978, so they can take this packaging material away so we can use this result. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the same problem appear with the biogenic carbon stored within the product. Also here we include the packaging material, and also here we have to delete the packaging materials, and then we can reuse this information to calculate what's inside the building, how much biogenic carbon is stored within the building. Next slide, please. And then there is a new calculation suggested in 5978 on how to calculate maintenance and replacement frequency. And we suggest in this report to use the new equation, and it's all suggested within the standard to use this equation. So this is also a more simplified approach to calculate the figures. And if I'm correct informed, the new CPR, they talk about the lifespan and that it should be a declared lifespan. So perhaps in future, when we develop CPCR, that's product category rules for specific products, like for wooden panels and things like that, they decide what is the minimum and the maximum and average lifespan. So perhaps we can use these data. But today we have national defined estimated service life and databases for that we will have to use. But this is also an area of future development, and we can perhaps use things from the new CPR and the performance of declaration in future for this purpose. The next slide, please. Okay, it's next slide. Yes, thank you. And then there is a topic where we don't talk about this, but actually when we visit the databases from different countries, there is this decision made, but you can't find them in any written documents. So when we access the EcoBauDat there is figure about how to allocate the impact from waste, but it's not described anywhere. And we have that also when we visit other databases that includes data for B6 and end of life. Within the new 5978, they suggest that you should use an allocation method that is called benefit sharing method. So if you have a district heating plant that produce heat and electricity, the electricity is more exclusive, so to say, so you will allocate more to the electricity. That's a good starting point within the standard. But the problem that is not regulated in the standard and not regulated in most countries' methodology setting is how to calculate the waste that you and in fact have to pay from the building to get rid of. So in the standard, they say if you fulfill the end of waste requirement, but you still have to pay for it, you can't regard it as it fulfill the end of waste requirement. So what we suggest is if you pay for it, the district heating plant will have an income from the waste handling, and they will have an income from the energy delivered. And according to classic LCA, that's a multi-input output process. So our suggestion here is that we will divide the impact with a 50-50 split upstreams and downstreams. And if you have an waste that you don't have to pay for and you have an efficiency more than 65%, it will not be any problem. It will not affect your product, and it will be allocated downstreams. So this is an issue that we have a suggestion here, and we have not succeed to be agree upon this in Sweden. So I think this is something that will be under a debate in the future. Next slide, please. So this is a result from the Swedish pilot calculation based on everything that I have been told you today, except for end of life stage. In the Swedish approach, everything that is waste from a building is allocated downstreams. But if we have this approach that I suggested in the previous picture, you will have an increased figure for end of life, because the waste from the plastic will increase. So if you have the Swedish approach, then this picture is correct. And then when we include the decarbonization scenario, this is the consequence. The end of life, part B, the relative importance of part B, especially parts B6, that is perhaps normally 50%. Now it's only 12 to 19%. So this is the trend that we will see when we introduce the decarbonization scenario. But with it's important that you are aware of this end of life calculation here is based on the approach to calculating everything downstream, but we suggest to have a split upstreams and downstream for the waste that you pay for. So I think that was the last slide, or am I correct? Yeah, it was one more, yeah. So this was a lot of detail, I suppose, but there will be even more details and more description within the report. And we also have a summary where we have highlighted the most important aspect and recommendation per module as well in the summary of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I remind people that there is the Slido where you can put questions. We have some good questions that we'll be discussing in the end there already, but please keep them coming. Then we can go forward to the kind of national GBP databases and our experience from those. We go forward. We can start with a simple picture to calm down a little bit, and then go into more details. You can go to the next slide.
Janne,
yes.
Before we proceed, maybe a small comment. We noticed that there was a small typo in one of the slides. Just not to confuse people, I wrote a chat about this error or typo, which we found there. So please, everyone, notice about the EBBD. So all the new buildings bigger or larger than 1,000 square meters should have the GBP calculation, not 5,000, which was a typo. Just not to confuse the people that are aware of the EBBD. But yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. We will update the slides, and once you go get the slides from the Nordic Sustainable Construction website, there will be corrected, so you can get the right information there. Okay, but back to the databases. We've had the databases for a couple of years now, and those are, of course, mainly made to provide data for these calculation methods and limit values for assessment of buildings. And the main target is to correspond to the method, whatever it is at the time. So there will be changes in that, and we need to be certain that this kind of national data always corresponds to the current assessment methods. But that's not all that these databases have been doing. They have also presenting kind of official generic data for many purposes. And furthermore, they are open and they are updated at all times, more or less. So there's a promise of updated public kind of official data, and that has been quite a big difference as well. Go forward, kind of a situation where we are now on the data. We know that we have the regulation there. Also, the emissions data is available for any current methods of calculation that we have in the Nordics. And the only little problem is that the methods and the data are not quite unified within the Nordics if they need to be. But then there's lots of other action in the market. There's voluntary action, of course, pilots and research and consultants doing lots of calculations for anybody needing them. But there's also action in the manufacturing of building products, in the stores that are selling building materials. They are requiring environmental information from the manufacturing companies already. The rental equipment companies are all calculating GBP values for their equipment. Builders, cities, investors renting space, office space, they are very focused on understanding the LCA as well. Going to the next slide, a kind of a reminder that while this is quite an detailed and not so easy area, there's still lots of typical normal people sort of using the databases. I mean, these are not the LCA specialists that are using this kind of data. This kind of data needs to be made simple for those purposes that these professionals are using within their profession. And going forward, the next, we are hearing that the standardization regulation, they are all going into the really good direction. But then kind of the question comes up that, okay, my understanding, maybe 3 to 5 years, and you will have a very nice regulation, all goes well, but can we really wait to reach the kind of sustainability targets that we have? If you are starting from 3 years from now, are we already too late? Going to the next slide, some of the ideas that what's going to happen in the future, what are the kind of learnings, and of course, the future regulation And now the availability of this kind of official data, updated open official data, has started the ball really rolling. I mean, I can already see the impact in the market. Everybody's talking about the GVP, which is good, and that by itself is probably causing some kind of impact anyway. Regulation is important, but so is the availability of data to actually start something. I wrote here that the KISS has been success, and meaning that we are keeping it simple, and that has been a very good recipe so far, that lots of people can be integrating this kind of simple data to their systems. And I think we have had a very good introduction into the industry due to that fact. But then, as Martin mentioned, the DPP, all the BIMs, all the different kinds of things that we need in the future to make the integration even more fluent, so these experts in their own profession can fluently use this data, then we probably need something a little more complicated to but interoperable to do with all the needs. Talking about the needs, there is very different needs in the early design, building permits phase, or as built phase. The data is very different, and so is the potential for impacts in that phase. I think we will be needing all of these phases. Some kind of calculations or assessment will need to be done on all those phases, even if the regulation would contain only as built, for example. So lots of new data is needed, and build the continuity and trust, so that you know that you have this good information. That's key to creating impact. Speaking of the new data, when we are going forward, there is this one area that has been causing lots of LCA head scratching, which is the vegetation, and how do we really take into account the carbon sink and the biogenic, the trees, for example, in building LCA. Here, I'll pass it to Heli and take the next part, and then we are ready for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Janne. My name is Heli Miettinen. I'm coming from Natural Research Institute Finland, and I'm presenting the carbon stock and sink data of trees in urban areas in the context of building climate reporting. And there is also mention our working group. Some words about the background of this part of the report, about the need for vegetation data in building LCA. Latest research findings shows that the carbon sequestration potential of green areas in urban environment and the capacity of green spaces to offset fossil fuel emissions in the cities can be significant. Despite of that, there is no general method to add vegetation data to construction databases for end users to use the material. Our report was aiming to create a simplified life cycle carbon balance approach and provide example data from limited geographical area to account for the carbon balance of living biomass in individual trees. And we were focusing on trees because in urban vegetation, the carbon sink they are producing is the largest, so we choose trees in this study. We assessed the changes in the carbon stock resulting from the individual urban trees that are felled, retained, and planted in the construction area over a 50-year period, and we produced generalized values for the construction emission database combined with the life cycle assessment results. Next slides, please. So we had three life cycle scenarios what we were looking on. The first one was that a tree was planted on the construction site. So we predicted the growth and carbon sink for 50 next years. We included this planted scenario, the seedling production, logistic, fertilization, soil preparation and maintenance. But we were assuming that the trees are not cut after 50 years, so we didn't include harvesting the tree. The second scenario was removed trees, which are meaning trees which are removed from the construction area during the construction building. So the carbon stock that the trees has been accumulating was harvested. We were including the logistic, wood chipping, and the wood use as energy into account. Then the third scenario was remaining trees. So during the construction process, the trees which already exist in the area were left on site. So the carbon sink for the next 50 years depends a lot on the size of the tree. And also in this scenario, as in the first scenario, we were not including the tree harvesting. We were assuming that the trees are left on site after 50 years. Next slide, please. Then we collected data for the life cycle inventory, and the results, the detailed results you can find in the report. But what we were including were soil preparation, seedling production, and in seedling production we included the seedlings at the nursery, like the greenhouse emissions from the nursery, fertilization, the use pot at the nursery, the maintenance, and electricity and heat use. Then we were adding planting, fertilization, maintenance, like the typical way to maintenance the urban trees, leaf collection and treatment, harvesting and transportation, and avoided heat. And all of these depending on the scenario, which were depending on the scenario. Next slide, please. Then we calculated annual tree carbon sink over 50-year period. The tree carbon stock estimation and carbon sequestration predictions of these three scenarios were done using IT Eco software for 30 most typical urban tree species used in largest cities in Finland. Here we also had the limitation in the data that we can use. There, for example, there are not data set that we can use from northern Finland, so the geographical area was limited. It results that the size and tree species have a significant impact on the results. In this analysis, mean carbon sequestration is higher for broadleaf trees than conifer trees over 50 years, which you can see from the figure where are shown the mean values for broadleaf species group and conifer species group. More detailed information about the the results for the trees, taking into account the size and species, you can find in the report, but here we are showing the mean values. But even when using the species-specific figures that can be seen on the report, these results are cross-simplifications based on assumption and should interpret as indicative figures. Next slide, please. And here I show the combined results of biogenic carbon sink and life cycle emissions over a 50-year period. If we looking the figure, we have there the carbon sink or emissions. The minus values are carbon sink, the plus values are emissions, and we have there 3 different scenarios: remained, planted and removed trees, and 2 groups, broadleaf and conifer groups. The darkest bar is biogenic carbon sink, or in case of removed trees, it's emission. The bar in the middle is the emissions from the life cycle inventory, and the light blue bar is total result. So if we are comparing the scenarios, we can see that the highest carbon sink is achieved when trees are retained in the area and felling trees are avoided. Tree removal results the highest emissions. However, these emissions can partly be compensated by planting new trees. But planting new trees is not so, it does not create so efficient carbon sink than in the case that the trees are left on site. And it's important to remember that these figures are rough generalization based on several assumptions about climate, tree growth, tree health, and most typical practices. We are also assuming that trees planted on site are chosen correctly, and that's why they are growing well. And more detailed information about this you can find on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Heli. And that kind of concludes our presentations this morning. And now we'll go into the Q&A, open discussion. If you take the next slide, it's also kind of a question where we go from here. And since there is the kind of quote from Nordic ministerial declaration here that there is a commitment to continue the collaboration on harmonizing, we'll probably be seeing some of these results used by the Nordic authorities, at least, and then the question, the discussion can continue, and we can feed up the information to the EU as well. But we have had some questions, and we have nice time to answer them. I'll share this. Questions. Here you can see the questions, and I'll start from the top. So there is the generic question from Latvia. What is actually driving Nordics to be the front runners? And I think maybe we can ask Maria, since you've had this other task in the project to look into what's happening in the Nordics, and then Martin and maybe myself to have a comment.
Yeah, and maybe Helle could also elaborate the situation in Denmark, but in Finland, it's partly based on the industry and also the policy making. So we have started our decarbonization roadmap work already 2016 or 17, and been planning to implement the climate declaration and the limiting values for in our regulations. So the roadmap has been like the first step in this process, and also the support of our stakeholders and industry, of course. And the climate declarations are done voluntarily already now, even though the demand for those climate declaration will come in a couple of years in Finland.
Thanks, Maria. And Helle, you can just put your camera on if you want to have an answer on that. And there, what do you think?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for all the very interesting and detailed information. It's very important knowledge that we look forward to work with. So with this specific question, what is driving the Nordic countries? I think, as Maria said, I'll echo that. The sector is see that with the climate ambitious, I think for the EU as a whole, it's climate neutrality by 2000. Is it 45 now? Or is it 50? I don't remember. But anyway, then we need to act, and the construction sector has a huge role to play, both regarding the climate emissions, but also the resources that is also lacking. And to reach that, then the industry has a role to play. And at least from a Danish perspective, we just had a political agreement a few weeks ago on tightening the limit values. And this was tightened more than actually predicted in the original strategy, because the industry see a big need to change practice and also to integrate new methods, and also very much to look into how can we actually use the existing square meters we have in a better way. In our program, we have made an overview of what are some of the industry-driven initiatives. So maybe they are public-private initiatives, but I will share them with Janne, and then maybe he can share it in the Slido or put it in the chat.
So Martin, you have been following the area for a long time as well. What do you see? Why are we front runners?
Yeah, I think it's very much actually market driven. I mean, we have this roadmap in Sweden, and we have also roadmaps in other countries from the industry, and that means if there is support from the industry, it is easier to introduce legislation to support the market-driven approach. So, and I think there is a win-win situation between new climate improved buildings and the market for those materials that are needed. So I think there is a lot of front runners that think this is also good for business, not only for the overall environment climates. It's also good for business, and I think we should remember that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Martin. In Finland, we have also seen like sustainability as an export possibility. That's been also one of the drivers.
I agree with all of this. I've been doing it a long time, and it's good for everybody. I also want to point out something I already did in the presentation, that the availability of data that you can do something concrete, that has been kind of speeding things up as well. I think that has been seen on the markets as well. Then moving on to the next question. Martin, you have questions about the Swedish project. Maybe you can, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, we will have a report published within 2 weeks or something, but we have we take it stepwise. We prefer that this project is published first, and then we will publish our Swedish project. So we are waiting for you, so to say. So it's in the correct order here, because this is the main result. And in the Swedish project, we also will provide a manual for different LCA tools, how they can implement and support these calculations. So, but we can give you a link for when we have the report published.
So more information soon to come. How about the digital logbook? Any drafts that you are aware of, Martin?
Yes, I don't think there exists any draft of that one. So we have another Swedish project that we will provide the basis for that digital module, the digital structure. And we have also invited for the meeting this week to BP3 Tom Häntinen, so we can check between the project. Oh, please help me. Is it task 3? I think they are task 3. So that we can jointly support each other. And so what we are doing is perhaps something that could be also support task 3. So 3, sorry. So there is nothing now, but we think that we will provide this, or we have as a deliverable in the project, that we should have something in the end of this year, a basis for this digital logbook. And that will be a digital logbook from the contractors to the commissioner of the building. So that will be the start for the digital twin, so to say.
Thanks. We move forward then. The GVP A2, biogenic fossils and LULUC, and Martin, you are not suggesting that the indicator is summing up fossils and LULUC, but all 3, I guess.
Yeah, all 3, but you take the biogenic part of GVP biogenic away. And the fact is, if you make a calculation from A to C, the GVP total is equal to GVP greenhouse gases. So it doesn't affect the overall result. It's just increasing the transparency. And actually, this was how we done in the past when they calculated the LCA. So this way of calculating the LCA that we see now, based on the new 1584, is something quite odd. It's not happening in any other system. So, and you destroy the modularity and the comparability when you have this approach. And especially in Swedish legislation, if we have a limit value for the construction stage, we can't have all this negative impact from the biogenic carbon that we know will be 0 over the life cycle. So we have to have a clean, so to say, GVP that allow comparison for module by module.
Yes, so that is the kind of suggestion here, and then we'll see where we end up in the standards and so on, but that will remain to be seen. And then the question is sustainable construction materials and architecture.
I don't know,
Martin?
could Max perhaps explain the question a bit more, be more precise, or is it possible to let people talk, or is yes, everyone muted, or?
Here, Max, you can take it up. Well, we can
I'm not
forward.
sure if Max is there, but I think what he asked is that in the Nordic Sustainable Construction Program, we have work package 3 that tries to identify some of the barriers to build sustainably and what role does architects have for that. And he can write, when you go on to work package 3, you can find some of the contact details and write them. If you can't find it, you can write an email to the secretariat and we can forward it to them.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Then Martin, Brigitta's question.
Prefab elements, they are as any products. There is no difference. We defined a construction product as something that is delivered to the construction site, and an element is also in that respect a product. So you treat it as any other product. So it's no difference. So I think it's very straightforward. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I missed something.
So everything is included in prefab elements as well.
Yeah,
as
so
in the raw construction
yeah.
material. That's
in Sweden, there is a debate that we, instead of making things on the construction site, we do it in our manufacturing, and then we don't have to make as much on the construction site. But we don't. I mean, in Sweden we have a limit value A1 to A5, so it doesn't matter if that is the question.
Yeah. Okay, then.
Sorry if I may. Then maybe I can add to this one. If you consider such a ready-made products as a module, construction module, building module, or the same prefab element as well. So then we should expect that this element or this building module would also have EPD.
Yeah, of course, we have that.
Like
we have
the
EPDs
ready-made
for
room,
Yeah, so we have you can find for outdoor wall elements, sandwich, and thing. They are as any EPD. So, and you have for volume elements, you have EPDs for that as well. So it's no difference.
And also like the building module itself as well. Ready-made building module is EPD.
Ready-made building.
Building
it's a building
module,
volume,
yes,
you mean,
like
for
the
instance.
volumetric element, like
Yeah,
the whole room
no,
with everything inside.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same. You have an EPD for that as well.
Okay,
no problem.
Thanks.
Okay, then you have a couple questions to Heli, I think. Did you include the biogenic carbon emissions from the removed tree in the removed scenario?
In the removed scenario, we have included the lost carbon stock from the tree at the moment when it's cut. So, and then that is divided to the next 50 years. We haven't been including the lost carbon sink for the next 50 years to the values that I presented.
Right, and then there's another question on I3 Eco, and did you have the carbon sequestration in soil or just the tree?
The I3 Eco does not include the carbon sequestration in soil or the root carbon input to the soil from the root. So that is excluded from the calculations. It's including the whole tree, including the roots, but not the carbon input to the soil. And but I3 Eco is taking into account the climate zones, the local climate. So there is differences between the zones.
Thank you, Heli. And so that was the questions at the moment, and we are right in time. We have a couple of minutes if there are some new questions coming up, but otherwise, I want to thank you for this morning, and we'll present the materials, and of course the report is out there for you to take a look and read. Nice little light summer reading for anybody interested. Yes, there are no further questions, so we are adjourning and wishing you a nice day and summer as well.